Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Teacher Ashley, and this is Education with my co host, Teacher Maeryl. So, teacher, what can we expect from trends and issues in education?
Okay, so our main focus today is on the trends and issues in curriculum development, and we will tackle these topics with different speakers. These topics are localization, indigenization, contextualization, and outcome based education.
That is correct, Teacher Maeryl. And without further ado, let's introduce our first speaker, Teacher Pius, for localization. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Teacher Ashley and Teacher Maeryl. So, first of all, localization law. It is also known as RA 8190, and it is defined as the act of granting priority to residents of the barangay, municipality, or city where the school is located in the appointment or assignment of classroom public school teachers. Initially enacted on June 11, 1996 by the Senate and House of Representatives of the Philippines in Congress. The law took effect on January 12, 2013 and was amended and signed by former DepEd Secretary Brother Armin A. Luistro. It had 5 sections, whereas the revised law has 9 sections. The differences between the two versions are the following. The revised edition is more focused on assisting and appointing and assigning them to public schools. Uh, Teacher Ashley, will you proceed to the next slide, please? And it also gives them the freedom to speak freely, which through a legal protest, and also the terminologies and the involvement, which will proceed to Section 1 of Republic Act 8190. I will add more details later on. So Section 1 is the definition of terms about the qualifications and background of those involved and surrounding the law, namely teachers, applicants, qualified teachers, bona fide residents, secretary, regional directors, protest, appointment, assignment, and registry. Moving on to Section 2, it applies to the coverage of the assignment of teachers in all public schools and other learning centers. Section 3, move on to the next slide. Thank you. Section 3 is the filling up of vacant positions. This allows the availability and interest applicants to take the vacant slots for the localization law. Section 4 is the recruitment and selection process rather. Applicants who are interested in being appointed or assigned to public schools must be bona fide residents. Written applications with necessary documents will be sent to the school head. After the verification and certification are accepted, it will proceed to the Office of Schools Division Superintendent. Then, afterwards, Division Office will maintain a registry, only valid for 1 school year. Lastly, Superintendent shall appoint or sign a teacher. For Section 5, it is the protest procedures for violations of RA 8190. It is a scenario where the discrepancies in the appointing of the teacher 1 position, you have the right to protest. It is a must to file a complaint at the regional office within 90 days from the issuance of the appointment. In 3 days, the regional director will require the school's division superintendent to respond to allegations in the protest within 15 days. The regional director's decision may be appealed to the DepEd Secretary for 15 days. Any appeal of the Secretary's decision shall be filed with the Civil Service Commission. Section 6 is the sanctions of the localization law. Those who violated localization law will be charged with the following consequences. First violation is suspended for 1 month without pay. Second violation is 2 month suspension without pay. Third and following violation is 6 month suspension without pay. Section 7 is the Separability Clause and Section 8 is the Repealing Clause. The Separability Clause means that any section in the implementing rules and regulations, or as we call it IRR, or any invalid provision that will be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court will be omitted. However, the law remains itself to be effective with the other provisions. When the RA 8190 was amended, the repeating clause factored into the revisions due to inconsistencies and much needed adaptations for the benefit of teachers and students. Section 9 is the final section of the RA 8190. It is the effectivity of the law. The implementation took effect within 15 days after being posted in the official gazette or at least one newspaper of general circulation.
All right. That is very insightful and a very interesting explanation, Teacher Pius. Thank you for that. And we shall now proceed to the next speakers, Teacher Patricia and I, for indigenization.
All right. Thank you, Teacher Ashley. Indigenous people tend to have less access to and poorer quality of education than other groups. Their education often does not incorporate curricula and teaching methods that recognize their community's histories, cultures, pedagogies, traditional languages, and traditional knowledge. Now, we will discuss indigenization. It is known to be the adaptation of service or idea to suit a local culture using indigenous people in the administration, employment, and other areas, but we will focus here on education. A more accurate understanding of indigenization would be a deeper, fuller, and more accurate understanding of the world, the ontology, and beliefs about knowledge or the epistemology. That is why it's no surprise that many people are unfamiliar with the term indigenization, which can cause levels of fear, misunderstanding, and even distrust. Both indigenous and non-indigenous people experience dissonance when it comes to the concept of indigenization, and it is linked to a variety of issues. First, our education institutions will be disassembled and replaced with an indigenous system, raising fears that it is a sort of reverse assimilation or colonization. Second, concerned that to integrate indigenous ideas, we may have to compromise or distort our rigorous approach to science, humanities, arts, and social sciences. Actually, there are several factors that should be considered when developing indigenization initiatives, and it begins with understanding that indigenization is a multi-stage institutional initiative and that supports societal reconciliation and an intentional, culturally sensitive, and appropriate approach to adding indigenous ideas, concepts, and practices into curricula when and where it is appropriate, and also a strategic set of changes to policies, procedures, and practices that increase inclusion, breakdown of barriers, and realign institutional, college, and school outcomes without harm to previously established goals. And lastly, individuals are supposed to love and understand indigenous people and culture, which is a source of concern. Indigenization of curriculum can strengthen inclusive communities and partnerships that respect and understand the value and importance of indigenous knowledge and practices. Examples of these are histories, teaching, languages, traditions, ceremonies, protocols, and even creative expressions. Belonging to the diverse people beyond, and that recognizes that academia benefits by valuing and including pluralistic ways of knowing, thinking, and doing. Engage in critical reflection of the colonial history and systematic effects on indigenous and non-indigenous people, and promote and support indigenous visions and aspirations for self-determination through transformative education for indigenous well-being, growth, and prosperity. Next slide, please. Okay, so indigenization in a nutshell is the process of improving curriculum skills, educational resources, and teaching learning processes about the learners' communities' biogeographical, historical, and socio-cultural context. Teachers in Araling Palipunan, for example, they can discuss heroes from their community rather than Rizal and Bonifacio alone. Next slide. So, the indigenous knowledge systems and practices, or the IKSPs, and indigenous learning system, or the ILS, are critical for indigenous learners according to the Department of Education. The Herald Express News stated that the adoption of the National IPED Policy Framework, which states that department shall give due recognition to and promote the sustainability of indigenous learning systems, and adopt appropriate basic education pedagogy, content, and assessment through the integration of IKSPs. So in all learning areas and processes. It has institutionalized their recognition of this in the basic education system. This acknowledgement and incorporation of IKSPs and ILS will pave the road for universal and equitable access to excellent and appropriate basic education services for all IPs, resulting in everyone's effective literacy. And in DepEd Order Number 32, Series of 2015, pursuant to DepEd Order Number 62, Series of 2011, entitled Adopting the National Indigenous People Education, or the IPED, Policy Framework, and DepEd Order Number 43, Series of 2013, entitled Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act Number 10533, otherwise known as the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013. The Department of Education, or the DepEd, is adopting the enclosed Indigenous People Education Curriculum Framework. So, recognizing the right of Indigenous people to basic education that is culturally rooted and responsive, the IPED Curriculum Framework seeks to guide schools and other education programs, both public and private, as they engage with indigenous communities in localizing and indigenizing and enhancing the K-12 curriculum based on their respective educational and social context. Next is the fundamental to IPED is establishing institutionalized partnership between indigenous communities and the respective schools or learning programs which serves them. This is to be pursued through sustainable community engagement, which guarantees the meaningful participation of indigenous communities in the inclusion of their indigenous knowledge system and practices, or the IKSPs, and indigenous learning systems, or the ILS, in the basic education curriculum. Then, the continuous process of community engagement and refinement of the IPED curriculum at the school community level actualizes the department's commitment to the attainment of the above-mentioned right of indigenous peoples to education. In this regard, for schools and learning programs serving indigenous learners, the aims of the K-12 program are realized through IPED. So the IPED curriculum framework was formulated based on inputs from a series of consultations conducted by the DepEd, or the Indigenous Peoples Education Office, or IPSEO, with community elders, leaders, and implementers of community-based IPED initiatives. And it is an immediate dissemination of and strict compliance with this order is directed. So along these lines, frontline instructors should be sufficiently oriented and prepared so that indigenous cultures are valued, and indigenous cultural practices and values are not discriminated against as backward, inferior, invalid, or primitive by embracing IPED and practicing indigenous ways of knowing, learning, teaching, instructing, and training students and teachers. Indigenous and non-indigenous will be able to benefit from culturally sensitive education that utilizes, promotes, and increasing understanding of indigenous traditions. Improving outcomes for indigenous learners needs our support. Teachers can promote understanding of and respect for indigenous cultural perspectives through the inclusion of models, methods, and content in their everyday teaching. Indigenous way of knowing to contain knowledge that can provide greater sustainability and stewardship of the earth, leading to a harmonious, balanced future. Now, may I call on Teacher Ashley to further elaborate our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Teacher Patricia. So, to further expound the ideas and concepts she explained earlier, we all know the Philippines is a diverse country, and having to apply this description to our education, we are reminded that there are communities with various cultural traditions that differ from the majority of people in the same area. Thus, deepening the curriculum contextualization through indigenization is a very much critical aspect to deal with. So, for our educational system here in the Philippines, it must be inclusive and relevant for everyone. And according to the Department of Education in 2016, the fundamental technique of creating places or opportunities within the K-12 basic education program for the students in connection with their culture will surely guarantee student inclusivity and the relevance of learning systems for them despite their cultural background and history. For this to be effective, all educators and the educational system must ensure that the community members participate in the said indigenization processes so that the curriculum remains accurate and true to the culture being covered. On the other hand, Williams in 2019 stated that it is an institutional project that is multi-stage. Multi-stage meaning it involves various processes which fosters societal reconciliation. As mentioned earlier, it incorporates indigenous ideas, beliefs, and practices into the curricula, which makes it suitable, purposeful, culturally aware, and acceptable whenever and wherever. Lastly, the processes are the bridge by creating the indigenous knowledge systems naturalized and evident in an attempt to transform the environment, the places, and the hearts of the people in our country. As you can see here, we can apply the indigenization in the classroom through the following modifications, such as first, broaden the range of materials and content. For example, utilizing educational materials that are culturally significant for the community, which can be done through exhibits, usage of the mother tongue language for students, promoting and teaching various dialects from different provinces here in the Philippines, and many others. For the second, teach students about power and social justice as learning outcomes. So this could be in the form of including the community's history and the student's role in society in the curriculum, applying various traditions, norms, or beliefs that are important for their identity. And lastly, incorporate innovative ways of teaching the said topics or outcomes and interconnect them with the current societal aspects and concerns they should be aware of. For the last, develop assessments that allow students to demonstrate competency in a variety of ways. So for this modification, concerning the competency guide in the curriculum, many strategies of assessments could be done not just by examinations only, but because we can also integrate activities like community projects, exhibits and performances, and many others to cater many competencies of the students, which could further help them learn about various topics about their culture and community. The mentioned modifications for the curriculum indigenization also align with how the Baliwag University defined the concept, wherein it is the process of improving curriculum competencies, educational resources, and teaching learning processes in light of the learner's community's biogeographical, historical, and sociocultural environment, as explained by Teacher Patricia earlier. Sorry. And here you will see the diagram, which simply explains the factors that affect indigenization and how it works within our curriculum. Let's first dwell here in the first factor, which is the biogeographical aspect. So in this aspect, this covers the communities or places which provide not only the area, but also the resources or educational materials needed for the curriculum. Second, the historical factor, which deepens the foundation of the curriculum, as this assists educators by providing information, legitimate basis, and theories that enhance the topics and strategies to be used in the curriculum, or more so, the classroom. And lastly, the sociocultural aspect, which caters to the people involved in the curriculum. It sets the appropriate learning environment where students are ensured to thrive with knowledge and be comfortable in expressing their identities, which promotes inclusivity and equity for all, as mentioned. All aspects explained must be in line with the curriculum framework, design, standards, learning resources, and teaching learning processes as discussed by the previous groups for the indigenization to effectively work in the curriculum. So after explaining this concept, we may wonder and think of the question, why do we indigenize the curriculum and the learning materials despite the innovative ways introduced to us in the educational system? This could be known wherein these are the concepts that are taught are in context which many students can learn quickly and retain information longer. As you can see here on the slide, the following advantages are mentioned earlier by Patricia. So I will not dwell on it much longer, and we will now move on to the next part. Teacher Maeryl.
Okay, so those explanations are quite insightful. Thank you, fellow teachers. We shall move on to the next speaker, Teacher Allyza, for contextualization.
Hi, it is a pleasure to be here today, and thank you so much, guys. Contextualization refers to the educational process of relating the curriculum to a particular setting, situation, or area of application to make the competencies relevant, meaningful, and useful to the learners. Additionally, it is a method of teaching that uses personal experiences and real-life situations to convey lessons. Lessons should be adaptive to students' knowledge levels and instructional needs. In idea of localization and contextualization, Next slide, please. It's included in the 1987 Philippine Constitution, specifically in Article number 14, Section 14, which states, "The state shall foster the preservation, enrichment, and dynamic evolution of a Filipino national culture based on the principle of unity and diversity in the climate and free artistic and intellectual expression." And according to the section 5, which states that the state shall take into account regional and sectoral needs and conditions and shall encourage local planning in the development of educational policies and programs. Okay, in addition, according to www.gavilan.edu, contextualization is necessary for education because many people or students learn better and faster and retain information longer when they are taught concepts in context. In this way, effective contextualized teaching and learning boosts student confidence, excitement, and interest in the long-term objectives and education. Students will learn more efficiently and meaningfully if new information is related to familial or local experiences, right? On the other hand, it's not always the good side, right? So, okay, there are challenges in the contextualization process of the curriculum that we are facing right now. According to Viaña, 2003, the concern with social aspects presents challenges and demands many attempts to develop new pedagogical and didactical strategies and adapting of old ones that no longer fit with current educational purposes to promote a better school environment which will contribute to developing a coherent curriculum. As a result, new views on skills, competencies, thematic approaches, key societal challenges, personal traits, aims and ideals, and blended such as functional and thematic methods have emerged. The curriculum, according to Connell 1993, the curriculum is now a process that includes daily experiences or daily school experiences that might contribute to the students' personal and educational growth. Okay? This concept of curriculum necessitates pedagogical practices capable of ensuring educational fairness and curriculum justice. Okay, so yeah, in a community-based class discussing sensitive or loaded themes in class may bring dangers to students, isn't it? Okay, or the program would not exist in the traditional classroom. Additionally, although students may gain new abilities in class, they may struggle to use those talents if they are not encouraged and the curriculum is not well prepared, right? So according to Aydin et al., there are 4 factors that are influencing curriculum and instruction, including number 1, policy changes, of course. It is hard or it will be difficult for the teachers to acknowledge changes and also for the students for sudden policy changes that are happening. It is hard to adapt it immediately. There are certain process or certain time that we need to adjust first, okay? The next is emerging new technologies. Technologies is a big factor in our education nowadays, such as new emerging technologies and social media, like that. And also, of course, if we have new technologies, we also have globalization. And as we all know, globalization is emerging, and as the world is changing, so are we, right? So as our educational process, our educational curriculum is also changing, the world is also changing. Of course, the teachers should need to adapt those changes as well as the students. Next is the refugee or the immigration issue. It could also affect the curriculum changes and challenges. that we are experiencing. Of course, we should adapt to the learners that are available in school. Okay, each of these areas, as you can see, provides challenges for both school settings and teachers, students, and also students. The curriculum may decline without enough government funding and preparation. And on the other hand, it will succeed if we have proper planning and proper funds to enough funds to fund those kind of programs for the students. And also, some lessons cannot be contextualized because there might be critical lessons that cannot be need to contextualize. So teachers should not compromise these lessons concept or content to make it contextualized or localized. Well, contextualization and localization should always come first in certain cases. Explicitly localized and contextualized ideas and materials led to mislead or overdue lessons. So, in line with this, of course, we also have what we call formula or a solution for that, for those challenges. In line with this, according to the Depth Ed Order number 35, series of 2016, student diversity requires that teachers always consider individual differences in lesson planning and implementation. Teachers identify and respond to opportunities to link teaching and learning in the classroom to the experiences, interests, and aspirations of wider school community and key stakeholders. Indeed, it is the teacher's role to manage the lessons and ensure that no one must be left behind, right? Providing spaces for unique cultures in the K-12 basic education program is a key strategy for student inclusion and ensuring that the relevance of education processes for all learners. Teachers and school systems must make sure that the members of the community participate in indigenization processes so that curriculum will be accurate and faithful to the culture in consideration. Okay, thereupon a Learning Action Cell or LAC is created. So what is LAC, you may ask? It is a group of teachers supervised by the school head or a certified LAC leader who participate in collaborative learning sessions to tackle common difficulties experienced in school. Such policies in the curriculum are applied and taught. It nurtures teachers to be capable of contextualizing the curriculum and aligning into localization and indigenization. So, as we can see, the problems are addressed, and it will come up with a solution with the help of the teachers and the program named Learning Action Cell. This is like a seminar type that teaches teachers. Teachers should also find, according here, teachers should also find time to discuss how their community linkages can support the curriculum and how the LAC sessions promote the professional growth. Furthermore, emerging the urgent issues and concerns affecting teaching and learning must be discussed during LAC sessions. These may include school data such as school participation, attendance, completion and assessment, finding activities, programs to be offered to include more learners in schools, result-based practices and technologies, and school successes. Okay, to wrap it up and to give you a conclusion about contextualization, the future of education is also bright, and we should aim for that kind of hope in the future. With the Department of Education preparing and developing new curricula for the students, such as the Mother Tongue or MTP-MLE programs serve children for non-dominant language groups who don't understand or speak the language of instruction when they join school. Also, diversity. I would also like to highlight that diversity and inclusion are essential in education. That should not be disregarded, of course, because students are important and students need a contextualized curriculum to apply what they learn in real life situations. And I do believe that students, for us future educators, for the future educators, we should always remember that curriculum is important to be created, and to know that no students should be left behind. That's all.
That is very impressive, Teacher Allyza. Well, it seems to me that each trend of the curriculum development is distinct and very useful. Thank you for that. And we shall now proceed to the next and final speaker, Teacher Maeryl, for the outcome-based education.
Thank you for that, Teacher Ashley. So, we will now discuss outcome-based education. I know you're quite familiar with this because we have this in PNU. We are a product of tech, right? Alright. So, let us define outcome-based education first. Outcome-based education is also known as performance-based education. According to Glavin, outcome-based education rejects the conventional focus on what the school delivers to pupils in favor of requiring students to demonstrate what they know and can accomplish whatever the needed outputs are. So the emphasis of OBE reforms is on establishing explicit criteria for visible and quantifiable outcomes. It is a pedagogical strategy that involves reorganizing curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment processes to reflect high-order learning rather than a simple accumulation of course credits. Basically, its focus is on a clearly stated understanding of what students should know and be able to accomplish when they leave school. For example, what skills and knowledge they should have. Now, Glavin also stated some of the major characteristics of OBE. First, the educational system should create a curriculum framework that outlines specific and measurable outcomes. The standards included in the frameworks are usually chosen through the area's normal political process. Second, there should be a commitment not only to provide an opportunity for education, but to require learning outcomes for advancement. Promotion to the next grade, a diploma, or other reward is granted upon achievement of the standards, while extra classes, repeating the year, or other consequences entail upon those who do not meet the standards. The third characteristic would be their standardized-based assessments that determine whether students have achieved the stated standard. Assessments may take any form so long as the assessments measure whether the students know the required information or can perform the required task. Lastly, there should be a commitment that all students of all groups will ultimately reach the same minimum standards. Next slide, please. Now, did you know that outcome-based education has different approaches to grading, reporting, and promoting? So, an important byproduct of this approach is that students are assessed against external and absolute objectives instead of reporting the students' relative achievements. The traditional model of grading on a curve, where top students gets the best grade, the worst students always fails, everyone else is evenly distributed in the middle, well, it is never accepted in OBE. Instead, students' performance is related in absolute terms. For example, Shane knows how to write the letters of the alphabet, or Shane answered 80% of questions correctly, instead of saying Shane answered more questions correctly than Kyla. So, under OBE, teachers can use any objective grading system they choose. In fact, many schools adopt OBE methods and use the same grading systems that they have always used. However, for graduation, advancement, and retention, a fully developed OBE system generally tracks and reports not just a single overall grade for a subject, but also gives information about several specific outcomes within that subject. For example, rather than just getting a passing grade for mathematics, a student might be assessed as level 4 for number sense or level 3 for measurement skills. Okay, so let us now provide the comparison between the traditional education system and outcome-based education. So while the traditional education system focuses on what is taught, OBE places emphasis on what is learned. The knowledge, skills, and attributes that students take away at the end of a program or course are more valuable than what or how something is taught. A traditional education system relies heavily on standardized processes. This means that the effectiveness of the education system largely depends upon the efficacy of the teacher and the knowledge base of peers. On the other hand, OBE is an education system built on specific outcomes. It focuses on the skill sets students acquire following the completion of their studies. Activities in or outside the classroom are designed in a manner to help students achieve these outcomes. Next slide, please. Yes, we are done with the comparison. How about its advantages and disadvantages? So one of the most profound benefits of OBE is the sense of clarity it fosters. Students, along with their parents, can pick an institution, program, and course based on clearly spelled out learning objectives. This clarity is further reflected in the quality of teaching and delivery, where faculty may adjust their focus more appropriately. The next advantage, and perhaps the most obvious one, is flexibility. OBE empowers students to choose what they would like to study and how they would like to study it. Not only does it adapt to a learner's strengths and weaknesses, but it also provides sufficient time to attain proficiency and fluency in the subject matter. Also, this model allows the learner to transfer their credits and switch to another institution that is accredited with the OBE syllabus. So as you can see, every stakeholder benefits from the OBE framework. However, Common Digital Campus stated that outcome-based education carries its own set of difficulties. The first drawback is the element or aspect of interpretation. This framework lacks a prescriptive set of instructional design. While outcomes are demonstrated, there is also much room for interpretation. Constructing learning outcomes can also be difficult as well as time-consuming. This brings us to the next drawback. OBE works well with vocational education streams like engineering and sciences vis-a-vis the arts. But perhaps the biggest disadvantage relates to the aspect of assessment or evaluation. Paper-pencil tests don't bring out the best in OBE. Yes, it requires diverse kinds of assessments, from group projects to quizzes. Furthermore, OBE within the virtual landscape is difficult to evaluate. That being said, the trick to dealing with the drawbacks is to strike a balance between what is expected and what is realistic. So, along with the above mentioned facts, these sum up the mastery behind outcome-based education. First, it contains clear-cut criteria for what constitutes mastery. Second, it is a thoughtful way of instruction that adapts to specific learner needs. Third, it offers complete assistance for learners and when they face challenges. And last, there is adequate time given to achieve mastery. So that's all for outcome-based education.
Wow, I learned so much today. Thank you, Teacher Maeryl.
Me either. What about our guest speakers? May I know your insights?
Yes, sure, Teacher Maeryl. Throughout the discussion, I have understood that curriculum development is indeed needed to help improve appropriate teaching learning strategies, methodologies, and instructional materials, among other things, to provide correct execution of the curriculum on the part of both teachers and students. Curriculum development is defined as a method for making beneficial changes in the educational system that is planned, deliberate, gradual, and systematic. Every time there are changes or developments in the world, it has an impact on school curricula. It is necessary to update them in order to meet the needs of society. The academic curriculum has generally been designed to favor the ruling group, indigenous people's perspective, worldviews, and experiences have been marginalized in educational systems because they were deemed less significant or relevant. Indigenization relates to incorporating indigenous methods of understanding, doing, achieving, and interacting into an institution's educational, organizational, traditional, and social frameworks. Overall, curriculum development is huge in scope since it involves more than just the school, students, and teachers. It is also about the evolution of society as a whole. Curriculum development is critical in today's knowledge economy for strengthening a country's economy. It also offers answers or solutions to the world's most important concerns and difficulties, such as environmental risks, political issues, socioeconomic issues, and other issues relating to poverty, climate change, and sustainable development. How about you, Teacher Pius?
So it really does revolve around the diversity and the adaptations for the curriculum development in order to for us to let's say let's not say survive, but also to live live fully to the expectations of the adaptations and changes for the trends and issues in curriculum development. So I would like to add on from teacher Patricia is that our curriculum back then was how many years was that? 10? Yes, it was 6 years of elementary, 4 years of high school, and it was not up to date. It was not updated before the K to 12 curriculum was legislated, and the Department of Education had to improvise once they saw what progressive country like Singapore in the Southeast Asia did with their quality education. So I would say that change is really good. That change is good. But the problem is that it was so sudden and schools and teachers were greatly unprepared, and they expected great results, outstanding results, which is just unfair. The curriculum development exists for teachers to adjust and adapt to the learning environments they freely choose. So the focus became more vivid, and I hope it continues to flourish for the next generation. I also want to include that without these curriculums that you know they will not give much more priorities for the indigenous people, because I would like to mention earlier what Miss Teacher Patricia said, that indigenous people are not relevant, which is not true because they are relevant. They are a part of our society and still are. And they gave us these cultural heritage and gave us the education. It was a civilized they are a civilized people. So what I'm trying to say is that without them it would be impossible for us to even exist because of them. They were our first people back then. So we just innovated some of their ways and transformed their system. So it is very true that they are relevant and significant to our society, and also paving the way for them, like the indigenization, is that it gives them much more benefits, and it gives them the benefits and priorities of granting accessibility and transparency from the system, from the Department of Education. So that is all I would like to add on furthermore. And thank you very much for that. I shall now proceed.
Indeed. Okay. Thank you very much, Teacher Pius. Indeed, your observations are very interesting and refreshing. It's very informative, I must say. And, well, that is all for our talk for today's episode. So, for more information regarding the topic discussed, here are our references in the slide presented. And here, the other references. And again, I am Teacher Ashley,
And I am Teacher Maeryl.
saying thank you for watching and listening with us here in Education. Have a good day.